Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 3 4. Let's see how this sounds. All right, this is a conference with Dudgean in regard to a situation that we desired him to give information on in connection with Dr. McBurney. Doug, if you would be kind enough to start back about your conversion and how you got tied up there, we would appreciate it. Go ahead.
Well, I became a Christian last August, and when I came out here to California, I roomed with a professing Christian lady who was quite interested in Dr. McBurney and his radio ministry, mainly because Dr. McBurney was a conservative, and from my background, I was quite conservative. And when I became a Christian, which was at the First Baptist Church of West L.A., Dr. Thomas's church, I went to a prayer meeting with this lady in Pacific Palisades, and they were the people from the United Community Church in Glendale. And
is that McBurney's church?
Right. So, and the Reverend Robert Graham was a pastoral minister there, and I shared with him my conversion experience, and so he invited me to the church, and so I went to this church, and being this was the only one that I knew about in the L.A. area, except for the West L.A. Baptist Church. And at that time, I thought interdenominational was a good thing, and I still do. I became a member of the church. So as I grew there in the church, I became quite familiar with the people in the church, and as a new babe in Christ, they helped me along a lot. There was the Christian education director there was a lady who was a very strong Christian, and she was very good, and she helped me more than any of them, because she was right in her theology anyway. And so I wanted to go to Bible school. I felt the Lord was leading me back to college. I'd gone to college before, and so I wanted to go to Bible college. So I found out about Biola. Well, this time I was working at the radio station, too, working part-time at
What radio station?
KBBI.
Oh, wait.
I went to work right away down there. This was led by the Lord, and I found out about Biola this way. So as I met Rich Bueller and Don Ransom and these guys, and we talked, I just wanted to go back to school and found out about Biola. So I came out here, but the church, it started me working right in the church, and it was a growing church. And at the time, I think there was about 700 or 800 members, and it started 6 years ago. So it was a real fast-growing church. But yet they needed a lot of people to work in the different positions, because a lot of them that came were just conservatives, and they came on Sundays, to hear about the communists and this type of thing, and then they would leave. So I had a chance to get in right away and work in the church. So I became close with the church, and I was up there a lot. And I even worked part-time for the church every chance I could get. So I came here to school. Bob Grant, I came to him and I said, I want to go back to college. And Bob said, well, you got too many bills, you better wait a while. So I told this to Gail Thomas, who was the Christian ed director, and she said, do you really want to go to school? Is it the Lord leading? I said, yeah. And she said, go. So I just went down here and applied and got in without, I didn't have any money at all. So then what the church did, the Lord, the way he led this, he led the church, which had confidence in me in this respect, give me a loan to come down here and paid most of the tuition for last semester. So I was quite indebted for them to do this. So I also needed work part-time, so I worked at the radio station, and then I worked at the church. So I become quite familiar and intimate with the church, with the different staff members, and by this time I was starting a junior high program up there. So unfortunately, the church was not a heavy emphasis on the spiritual, and I could see this as I grew in the Lord. It was mostly church membership. We'd have an invitation for church membership, and kind of thrown along the line, we'd have one for people who wanted to accept Christ. Now, there was people that were saved there, and this was because we had a couple of people that knew the gospel, that were on crusade staff, Campus Crusade staff. But there was just very few of us that were actually preaching the gospel. And actually had a tremendous witness up there because, telling about my conversion and just sharing with them. I didn't know really how to witness that well, but I saw some fruit at the church because of this.
Well, what was the burden of his ministry, of his message?
So as he preached on, and Dr. McBurney knows the Bible, there's no doubt about it. I've read his books. He's got many books out, and he's a very smart man. But he's one of these guys that has let as Reverend Mitchell says, the intellectual. He worshipped the intellectual, and he's got a lot of degrees. And so he preached. He used the word, but he made his whole message around. I would call it not exactly the hate concept, but when you don't have love, you got hate. And unfortunately, the people in the church naturally were hating the communists and the anti-communists and liberals and anybody else that didn't go along with the conservative way. And but like I say, there was enough. It had the form of Christianity, but denying the power thereof. And this is what I saw in the church as we grew. Now, many of us saw this because the ones that were spiritual banded together on this thing. So they helped me a lot on this. So by this time, I got to know Dr. McBurney intimately, and I became to know that he didn't have too much concern for anything besides his Voice of Americanism program. We never prayed together. You know, it was just everything was done in the worldly way, the business-like way. So I could see this, and he asked me to go to work for him. And by this time, I was starting to hear rumors, and I didn't know if I wanted to be connected that close with him and his Voice of Americanism office, although I did work for him in a sense that I worked at his home and this type of thing. But to go actually with the Voice of Americanism and travel with him, I just didn't know, because I was starting to hear rumors about his past. And this was about the time when it all started from the time when Brown and Reagan were running against each other, and the television stations come around here divulging his past about down in Texas. Well, I have a lot of skeletons in the closet too, and so I kind of felt that, God probably forgive him. But as I come to the point where I got to know him, heard about his extracurricular activities here in Glendale, and therefore I wondered if he really did repent, and I started questions coming through my mind. Well, I got to know his wife real well, because she was going under tremendous pressure at this time. And it seems that his experience down in Texas was he had a lovely wife for about 18 to 20 years, and he ran off with a wealthy woman who was his wife that I know out here in California now. And so there was a big stink about that all over Christian circles. So when he came out here to California, he was working with the Chiropractic Association and a couple other things, and connected with Wings of Healing also. And so some of the people that were conservatives in the Glendale area, I think about 5 or 6 families, decided they wanted to start a church, and he was quite a speaker and dynamic person, and he built this church down in Texas from 90 members to over 3,000 members in a few years. So he's a tremendous church builder, tremendous dynamic personality, as you can tell listening to him on the radio. And so they started this church 6 years ago called the United Community Church, and started in the Tuesday Afternoon Club in Glendale. Now, I was not there when all this happened, but these are things that I've heard from the members, the people that actually started, the deacons, the wife, from McBurney himself, and this type of thing, piecing all these together. So it started, and naturally the church grew. He started the radio ministry. He's got a tremendous outreach, and he plans. He knows how to direct mail, how to handle these things, impress upon the people, get it out. So he started quite a following, and people started coming to the church. Well, it grew like lightning, and now it's over 1,000 members. They had a big push. It was before the so-called split. So anyway, here's this guy building this church. All of a sudden, now people are starting to realize who he is. He's starting to get power again now. He's starting to run with the politicians, becoming intimate friends with Governor Reagan and this type of thing, coining the Creative Society. And these things are good in themselves. Tremendous conservative as far as knowing theology and as far as conservatism.
He coined the phrase Creative Society?
Mm-hmm. He's the one that actually put this together to actually sell it for Reagan. I mean, Reagan came up with a lot of the ideas, but McBurney was the one that tied things together and actually worked very close with him. Well, I wasn't there when there's many that are involved but McBurney's actually the one that put this thing together. So he's got tremendous ideas. And like I say, you look at him from the outward standpoint, he's a great man. But when you get to know him, you find out that it's just a facade. Anyway, in my life. Now, I don't know what others have found, and I can't speak for them. So anyway, he found out that as they started this church, it grew. And he started spending most of his time not with the church. Well, then come to find out that somebody came to counsel with him, a lady, Mrs. Garland Moore. And she was another young, beautiful, blonde, just like his first wife was about 8 or 10 years before. And she was having problems with her husband, from what I understand. And so he counseled with him, and just like he fell before, which was the same situation identical down in Texas, he fell for her, apparently. So he had, before long, anyway, she was working as his secretary, his executive secretary. And before long that, she was traveling with him and real close with him. Now the rumors were starting to fly. His wife, when I first came into the church, she was in Hawaii for a while to get away. Now, I didn't know why she was in Hawaii, but then a few months later, after I got to know her, I found out she was under tremendous strain and problems. She was under conviction that she had sinned and blew it when she was down in Texas, which of course she did. And she could see the same thing happening here in her life. So she wasn't going to take it anymore. I mean, and she was just about to the point where she was a nervous wreck and had a nervous breakdown. He didn't care. He lived practically by himself in the home and treated her like nothing, and just was so busy the whole time and with this other woman that it just made a fool out of her. So come to the point where she was going to get a divorce. Well, now, if she got a divorce, the church, he didn't want that. In fact, did not want this because of the problems it would have with the people again. So they strung her along and promised her a few things, and he said he'd get rid of Mrs. Moore. So he got rid of her, and apparently Mr. Moore, and I'm still not sure about this because I don't know him real well. I know him, but I mean, we've never talked. And a lot of these things, I didn't get too close to the people involved because I didn't want to be that close to the people involved. But Dr. Moore apparently didn't know this, that all this was happening. He was kind of blinded. I don't know how, but he was. But eventually, anyway, Mrs. McBurney could not take it. He hired her back. He kept messing around. Finally, the deacons were concerned about this, and the deacons were the ones that founded the church. Now, the deacons, there was 24 of them now, I believe, that were involved in this, but a lot of them were spiritual men. They wanted to handle this right, but unfortunately, they tried to compromise and all this type of stuff. So we had a big round for a few months, and everybody that was connected inside didn't know really what to do. This was the time that I was going to leave the church the first time, and I went to Reverend Mitchell, and I asked him about it. And he said, what kind of ministry do I have up there? I had a tremendous ministry up there. He said, stay until you find something definite, or, until something actually does break. So I did stay. The Lord led me to stay there and as it came to be, I became a part of the group that actually was praying along the lines that the church would be straightened out. I started praying for McBurney, and at first it was hard for me, but as this love came into me, I realized that it was for God's good, and I was able to really have a ministry in the church by trying to help out whenever I could and by being a prayer warrior. Well, there's many other things that I'm not going into that were around the church, but the fact is that finally McBurney felt he didn't have to take orders from the deacons, and he'd do it his way, because he knew that he was out on a limb. He either had to go all the way or just back out. So finally his wife went down and got a divorce, or filed for a divorce on a Friday. Well, unfortunately, there's two fractions in the church, and there was another part of the people in the church that were out to get him. They didn't care how, the strife, envy, and division people. And before you knew what happened, everybody had something in their mailbox by Saturday. Some of them didn't get it, though, and which explained the whole situation down in Texas, the newspaper clippings of what happened down there, to make him really look bad. So he came to church on this Sunday. I don't know if I've tied this all together, but here's the point. He built the church up. The same thing is happening again in his life that happened down in Texas. His wife has filed for a divorce, so he's got to do something about it, because before it gets around to the people at the church. Everybody thought the deacons would have control of the situation. Sunday, Dr. McBurney came to church. Everybody anticipated a huge crowd was there. It was almost like a circus. And, you know, everybody wanting to know what's going on. And you can imagine all these anti-communists and conservatives that have no need for spiritual things there, wanting to know what's going on. It was kind of like a circus. So we're all sitting there, and I kept thinking, well, you know, I heard out here at school that God's going to get the job done, that, you know, McBurney would be thrown out, and everything would work out hunky-dory. Well, he gave a sermon on Acts about when Paul finished his ministry to these people, and I think it's in the latter part of Acts, and they walked him down to the shore when he left, and he gives such a great sermon that the people were practically bowing down and worshiping to him. And it was so great, you know, I said, hey, this guy really is good. And he had such a way with his getting through to people. And before he got done, everybody, and all he did, the only thing he actually said through the whole thing that I got out of it, he said a lot of things, but he said, I can't take care of my home, can you? And he tried to make it sound like his wife was a tool of the communists, that the communists had infiltrated his family to get her to go against him. And boy, this is all he had to say to those anti-communists. Communists in Dr. McBurney's home, we'll get rid of them, you know. Throw her to the wolves. And nobody cared about her. Here's a poor lady down there in distress. And he just threw her to the dogs. And he made it sound like she was the one that, you know, the communists had infiltrated, because it's just like, almost like Hitler. You can carry this right-wing stuff too far. He said, I'll get rid of the communists for you, and look what he did. He gave them a dictatorship, and that's just what Mac did. He went against everything he preached on the radio, or anything he ever written, because he took over a dictatorship. So anyway, what he said was, when he gets done with his sermon, he says, well, he said, I'd like to call. He went against his word. He told the deacons he would not call for a vote of confidence, but in a sense he did, because he asked us to bow our heads, and anybody that wanted him to stay, raise their hand. Well, I thought it was kind of a slipshod deal already, and I didn't feel led to bow my head, so I watched, and 95% of the people raised their hand to keep him, and only a few percent of the people didn't. So then he knew how he had people. Now, the great conniver knew what he was doing, and he said this. He said, well, now I don't know if I'm going to stay with you or not. Said, I don't know if I'm going to stay here at the church and be the head pastor. And by this time, during the few months before, the church had actually got to be a circus, because they were bringing these kings and different majesties from other countries in that he knew from his conservative circles, the barons and kings and all these people that were connected with either show business or conservatism or freedom or other countries and this type of thing. And so he got farther away from the Word all the time, because he didn't have confidence to preach the Word, I don't believe, although he did know the Word. He just... Right. So it was getting... So this was something, and he said that the kings and the queens were going to let him into the palaces. He had an open door everywhere he wanted to go. So and the voice of Americanism is growing so big and so fast, which it is. But it's still small compared to some of them. But it was bringing in quite a bit of money, and he built the Americanism Center there in Glendale, right by our church. But the church had more of an emphasis for the Americanism than it did the church. But here's this guy then saying that it's growing so big, I may go with this. I may just go with the voice of Americanism. But he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll think about it. Of course, not pray, but I'll think about it tonight, and I'll let you know what I'm going to do. Well, I left church with my head swimming. I had no idea what was coming off. I thought maybe God let us down for a while. And I remember driving back out here at school, and in the afternoon I prayed about it, and I said, God, aren't the deacons going to say something at all? Aren't they going to stand up and rebuke this guy? I thought the deacons were against him, and the deacons run the church and the bylaws. Well, anyway, all I know is Reverend Mitchell was talking to me about, and I don't want to get too much of me in here, but I think that this has an effect on what has happened, because I did get quite involved here, as you see in the evening. And Reverend Mitchell was telling about Nehemiah and Elijah, how they weren't wimpy Christians, and they got out and, you know, they went right in and rebuked the people they stood up for God and about Christ, throwing them out of the temples. And so all these things went through my mind, and all I know is I said, God, if there's something you want me to do, if there's anything that would be not done in my flesh and going and just trying to do it in my own, but if you want me to stand up for Christ or do anything, I didn't even say stand up, but if there's anything that I can do to help, just, you know, I'm available. Give me the power. So anyway, that night we went back to church, and of course there was a huge, bigger crowd there that night, because everybody wanted to see what was going to happen. And so he slumbers up there to the pulpit, and he said then that he would stay as the senior pastor. And the people went into applause. And I can't remember if they stood up or not, but I think some of them did. And I think it was just like a circus. It was, you know, It was like we just, like Goldwater just won the election or something, or for Johnson or something, one of these political meetings. And the people just gave him an ovation for a few minutes. And before they knew what was going on, he said, I want two things, though. And here he is, conniving again. I want no discussion on what has happened in my private life. I want nothing, at all. It's all said and done. It's forgotten. And two, I want another resolution. I want a 5-year contract. Well, this was just about too much. And before he even got this out, there was a guy standing up saying, I make that motion.
Oh, no.
Before we knew what happened, it was railroaded through. Because he had henchmen. And by the way, Dr. McBurney has different men hanging around him in his organization that kind of, go out and feel the people out and are sitting in the audience and just moving. Among them, Robert Hoekstra, who was...
Sounds like a political campaign.
It's like it's like a bad dream or something, because I didn't know stuff like this could happen, but I found out. So anyway, he had men like Bob Hoekstra behind him, who was connected with that, a lot of these Pentecostal men, these faith healers, that little David Walker in Indianapolis, for years, that little kid. Well, he was his promotional manager, and they had a big fight. You can read about him in any of these cult books. This Hoekstra, he ended up out here, and it seems to me that we called it the Pie Club, and these guys that were two-time losers from other parts of the country kind of ended up around here and kind of banded together. And I called it a Pie Club because they used to go out for pie at nights and get together. Guys like Warren Walker, Dr. Warren Walker, has a ministry on radio, but he's run off with Denise and all kinds of things. And I don't even want to get on him, but the thing is, they all ended up with Mac and Hoekstra and all these guys together. And they've all been, they blew it in their own towns and they got thrown out. Now they're out here. And I used to make a joke about they all end up in Winnipeg after here because Canada's never heard of them. So there's probably a lot of them up in Winnipeg that you'll see. But now I don't know about Dr. McBurney. I feel that we'll go on here with the story. I don't want to talk about his Christianity. So here he says this on this night, and I'm sitting in the audience wondering what's going on, and I'm really concerned about this. So finally, they railroad this thing through before you know what's even going on. And the head of the deacons, who was the chairman of the deacons, Ben Schimmel, he stood up and said, and he was scared to death. The poor guy, he was an older man, and he's been connected with Campus Crusade, and I believe he's quite a supporter there, and he had been out to one of their layman's institutes. So he wasn't too grounded in the Word, but he's had some training, and he realized that the Spirit-filled life and this type of thing. So I believe this is what really prompted him to stand, because these guys lost their spine when this all happened. But the guy, God rose him, and he said, wait a minute, I want to say something. And the people started to boo him, And Dr. McBurney said, well, and he's very gracious a lot of times the way he handles things, and he's just almost like I'm talking, well, let's hear from him. Come on down here, Ben. And so he invited Ben down to the front, and Ben came down there, and they had another microphone down on the bottom, but they had that turned off. They didn't want anybody, they had guys in the control rooms make sure nobody get a hold of the mic too, so they said, turn on the mic, let him speak. So they let him speak, and Ben said, well, I'd just like to read something from the bylaws. Anybody care about the bylaws? And so he read this, and he just said, of course, you're out of order here. You've completely, it matters of hiring and firing the pastor, the deacons do it, and you're completely out of order, and we just, want you to know this. He was kind of scared to say it, but he did.
Yeah.
And so Dr. McBurney knew just exactly how to handle the people, and you may wonder why he did this, but knowing him in psychology, how to handle people, he said, okay, come right on up here, we'll just take care of this right now. So he invited Ben to come up right on the platform. He said, we'll just throw out the bylaws. He said, to heck with the bylaws, we want the will of the people. And this goes against everything that he said on, he's ever written or said, because it's just a dictatorship, and he's actually communistic. And Ben Schimmel was scared to death, the poor guy. So he said, oh, I don't want to come up there. He said, I'm not going to come up there and railroad this thing through. We'll deal with this at another time, another place. So he walked back to his thing, and people kind of booed, and everything. And so, well, it's just like God just kind of grabbed me by the neck and stood up. And I said, well, if he won't assume the chairmanship, I will. And so I started talking, and I can't remember exactly what I said. But all I know is I was walking to the front. Now, Dr. McBurney liked me very well. And he didn't know what I was doing. So he was speechless. He stopped. He didn't even know what to say. He thought maybe I was going to come up and help him. That's what a lot of people in the church thought. I was going to come up and help him get this thing through. But everything was going according to Hoyle so far, and now, all of a sudden, there's something there that he didn't know how to handle, and he was just shocked. But so to speak, anyway, I got up there in the front, and of course I didn't have a microphone, so I stood up beside Dr. McBurney, and I said, well, basically this is what I said. I stumbled my words, and it wasn't right, but God still used it. I said, well, we're here to honor Jesus Christ. We might as well go all home if we aren't going to honor Christ. You know, you want this guy or Christ? And by this time, as I stumbled this out, and it didn't come out this good, and a lot of people probably didn't even understand it, but it got out. They knew what was going on. So Max said, wait a minute, this guy's out of order here.
Yeah.
And so he said, would you sit down, you know? And I just kept talking. And so pretty soon then the people started applauding. And
You?
no, they were applauding to keep me quiet.
Oh,
You
I
know,
see.
over my voice, because I didn't have a mic. Of course, I don't need a mic, but I was just talking, and they applauded to keep me to, you know, sit down, like, get out of here, we want Mac, you know. So in other words, they had their choice between Mac and Christ, not me, but of Christ, and well, they chose Mac. But the point is that I felt that they should make a decision, and at least somebody stand up for Christ. And of course, that's debatable whether, in the other people's mind, whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing. I know that I was trusting the Lord, and I did the right thing. But the point is that I felt like Stephen up there. You know, you hear, I read Stephen that morning about how they gnashed their teeth at Stephen. And the whole church, who was very kind to me, who had helped support me and their money that I was going to Bible school. And every one of them, just, they invited me out to, not every one of them, but I was invited to their homes on Sundays, and I was just part of their families, and they were so encouraged that I was studying the Bible. I was the only young man in the church that was studying the Bible, that was going to go on into some form, phase of Christian service work. Here these people, in just like that, turned on me. And it wasn't me, it was just Christ, what they saw, because they wanted human. But the fact is that I saw these people that out there that loved me just were gnashing teeth and just getting out of here, you know, they just hated me. But I felt good in my heart, a peace and a joy. And so, anyway, Dr. McBurney asked me to sit down, and they kept clapping. So finally, after a few minutes, I did walk down. And there was a friend of mine named Ted Seymour, who's on staff at Campus Crusade, who has been concerned too. And a lot of the people didn't really know what to do in this situation. I mean, they were confused. They thought the deacons would handle it, but they didn't. So we all come to find out what was going on. So when I walked down anyway, Ted came up and shook my hand, and we left. And many of the others got up and left too then, the ones that were Christians.
Is that so?
So we kind of trickled on out of there. And of course there were shouts, get out of here and never come back, and this type of thing too. And I remember just turning around and I said to Dr. McBurney, what about Jesus Christ? And he said he's not under discussion here.
Oh,
And that's the last. And so when I left the church, of course, naturally I was divided emotionally, you know, what happened and what went on. All I know is it happened so fast. And of course I wasn't that far along in the Lord. But I got there in a hurry. But anyway, I left the church, and so then as the night went on, I guess many more left the church. And of course then as more found out the full story, a lot of them did leave. So what happens then? Well, a lot of the leaders of the church got together, and they knew that this was a problem. So they wanted to get together and meet together to see what to do. They didn't know at this time whether the church, Mac would eventually be relieved, he would leave, what would happen? Whether they should go into another church, whether they should start another one. So this took about a month for all of this to happen, meeting every week. And of course I didn't go the first 2 times because I didn't feel that, like I said before, there was people out to get Mac, and there was Mac himself. And I felt that as I talked to Reverend Mitchell, and the Spirit spoke to me, that I didn't want to be a part of either group. Because a lot of these people were looking upon me. When I would see them, they would start congratulating me for what I did and all this type of stuff, and I didn't want to be involved in that. And so I wanted to just stay away completely and go somewhere else. And so like I say, I haven't had much to do with this new group. But the new group has met. They didn't know what they were actually going to do. But now they have. They rented the same Tuesday afternoon club that the church originally started with about the same founders.
Is that so?
Yeah, and they meet, and from what I understand, they've had good speakers. A lot of these people now are good Christians. These people that are in this group now, and a lot of the hate mongers that had started possibly in this group are kind of left. So from what I feel now, that it is a good group, and they're learning the Word. They've had Hal Lindsey come in there and preach. They've had Dr. Feinberg come in there and preach. So they've had some men come in there, and they're getting the Word. Now, I don't know what's going to happen and how they're going to grow, but I'm praying for it, and who knows, it could go into another church merge, it could start another church. But during this intervening couple months, like I say, nobody knew what was happening. There was more people finding out the truth all the time. Now, there still are. So they have either left, gone to their own churches, or gone with this group. Many like me that have just gone their own way, that felt they didn't want to have anything to do with either group. Not that either group is, that we're condemning it, but just that we feel that the Lord is leading us somewhere else. So this is the case now. Since then, there's been many hate letters going back and forth between the two groups, and other people getting involved in there and trying to send out things. Some of the people have resigned from the church, the staff. They've brought a couple more in. In fact, he's run a big ad in the paper to try to bring more people in because he wants to build it up and he doesn't want to let it get away. Reverend Grant, I asked Reverend Grant, I didn't ask Reverend Grant, pardon me, Dale Thomas, who's left the church, who was a Christian in. She asked Reverend Grant what scriptures he was standing on in deciding whether to back McBurney or not. He said, scriptures, I don't need those, I know what I'm going to do, and naturally he stayed with him. His pay is very lucrative, and he's a hatchet man, a max, and he can't afford to leave. He's got
Is that Don Grant?
Bob Grant.
Bob Grant. What's his, is he the foreman?
He's the foreman, and he's the assistant pastor. What he actually does is goes out and visits all these people and tries to get them to become members of the church.
Yeah, I see.
And as far as him being deep in the Word, talked to him a few times after I went to Bible school, compared some things that I heard out here with him. He disagreed with practically everything. Very lukewarm, didn't even really have any ideas on many things. So this guy is, I would say, in my opinion, inapt as a minister too. He's trying to, I don't know if he's trying to get a pastorate somewhere else, but he just doesn't have what it takes. So therefore, he would like to stay with Mac and represent.
Is he a graduate of Fuller?
Right.
Oh, he's not attending there now. He's a graduate.
No, he's 30 years old or so. I mean, he's been with Mac when he started. He started with Mac when Mac started this church. He was going to seminary, about a senior, and they brought him in.
Yeah.
And he just stayed full time.
That
Might say something about the wife situation now.
That's what I was going to ask.
So this is the situation with the church. Now all this other...
Well, let me ask you, before you leave the church situation, when they began to boo you, what were you saying? Were you giving something from the Bible, such as a sermon, or were you revealing some of his past, or what?
No.
They began to boo you, and you said you still kept talking, but I didn't know what nature you were talking about.
I just basically said that we're here to honor Christ, and this thing should be handled outside the church. It should be handled between the deacons and him during the week, and nothing should be said now, and this type of thing. I could not condemn him because, like I say, I didn't get up there to condemn him.
Yeah.
And some of the people, I'm afraid, had probably the wrong impression even why I was up there, because it all happened so fast, whether I was for him or against him.
Yeah.
So the thing of it is, I was neither. I was for Christ. And I wasn't condemning him. I was just saying we want Christ. And I wasn't talking about his past, so to speak, but this thing should be handled properly with God's guidance. And this thing wasn't out of the Spirit, is what I was basically saying.
Okay, well, you go ahead where you were then.
So his wife now, from what I understand, the trial, or not the trial, but the divorce to go to court was supposed to be soon. I thought it was supposed to be sometime here in September on the calendar. His wife sued him for divorce. He sued her back, apparently, with he cross-filed on her to get rid of her. You know, in California law, she could still change her mind up to a year, and of course, he could not get his way because he's under pressure, too, with this other woman. When I was out here at school then, after this happened, after I stood up against him, he didn't know what had happened, and he sent an investigator out here at school, you know, checking up on me. And he was really bothered by what I did because he couldn't understand why I did this. And this really bothered him. So anyway, he does worry. He's really worried. He's really shook up over this. Then there's been this is just from what I've got from close friends, that they have found him with another woman He's running with another one now too, and they caught him with her a couple places around town. So I don't know what's happening with who he's going with and who he's even got, but I know he was under pressure there, and I understand that somebody told Mr. Moore, and he was involved, and he had people out after Mac, and so they were coming at him from all areas. And so, but then I understand that she's still there as his secretary, so I'm not that sure just what. And I haven't asked anybody, because the minute you do, you start causing strife, envy, and division all over again. But I do know that they are supposed to go to court, and the reason this hasn't been played up in the papers because Max, the liberal people, the establishment, and the would like to get him. There's no doubt about that. In fact, they were trying to infiltrate our church to get him. And so he's been under attack here for what his beliefs are, and they'd love to get something on him like this. Now, I understand this hasn't broken the papers because he's a real good friend of George Tout down at the Los Angeles Times, and they've held this down. Now, that's all I know. But I understand that when it does break, when they go to court, there is something definite they can't have, that a lot could break loose. But like I say, I haven't even heard anything about the court case so far this week. And that's all where I stand involved. I'm completely separated from the church. When I walked out of that church that night, that it was actually thrown out, I haven't gone back. I haven't been in the church. I haven't talked with anybody connected except some of the people that have left. And because of what I felt towards their motives, I went one time to one of the meetings. They were talking about starting a church, and they were doing things in a worldly manner, and I said, well, if we're going to do anything, it's got to be led by the Holy Spirit. We can't have another situation that happened 6 years ago, and we must pray about it. And I asked to pray right there, and nobody seemed to want to. And the whole situation didn't seem to be led by the Spirit, and there's many good people there that were involved in this other group. But I just felt that they were doing things with a worldly way, so I went my way, and I haven't really had much contact since.
Doug, have you had any information about his financial goings on at all?
Well, yeah, of course he claimed.
The